in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ana Rojas, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to this Gecko and Energia webinar on political economy. We are still having quite a large number of participants joining us, so we would like to give a couple of minutes to allow them to join in. So I'll be muting myself for the coming 2 to 3 minutes, and we'll get started very soon. Thank you for joining. Well, good evening, good afternoon, and good morning, everyone, from wherever you're tuning in. My name is Ana Rojas, and it is a pleasure to welcome you all to this, our 9th Gecko webinar, which is brought to you thanks to the financial support and of USAID. We're also very thrilled because this webinar is the second of a special collaboration with Energia, the International Network on Sustainable and Gender and Sustainable Energy, which is it's a long-time ally and partner and friend of IUCN. So it is a pleasure and an honor for us not only to host you participants, but also our panelists on today's topic, which is in political economy. and how this can be used as a tool for addressing gender equality in the energy sector. Before moving into our webinar, I would like to share with you a couple of virtual housekeeping matters. As you can see, participants are being kept on mute, and that is because of the large number of participants we're having. We want to avoid as much as possible to have interference or sounds that would may hinder your listening to the presenters. So this is the reason why you're on mute. This doesn't mean you cannot participate. If you take a look at your computer screen, you will see a toolbar where you can send in your comments and questions. So I would like to invite you as of now to start communicating with us through that toolbar using the chat function. I also would like to say that my colleagues Maggie Roth and Maria Preble are helping us behind the scenes with all the technical issues regarding this webinar. So if at any point you do have technical difficulties, please share your questions with us and they'll be happy to help you out. They would also be collecting your questions so that once we've had the presentations, we can then share this with the panelists and start what we hope is going to be a very lively discussion. I would also like to invite you to take a look at the handout section on the toolbar. We have there are 3 handouts for you. One is on the GECO initiative, and we also have 2 papers. One by Andrew Barnett on political economy and the African power sector. And another paper is by Katrine Danielson on a gender and human rights approach to energy access. So if you're interested in going into a little bit more of depth in the conversation of today, I'll invite you to download these handouts. Also, this webinar is being recorded. So if you want to have access to its video and audio afterwards, you would be able to find it on our website. Same with the presentations that you'll see today. We will be uploading them shortly after the webinar finalizes. And with this, I would like to proceed then with a small introduction as to today's webinar. If you excuse me, I seem to have issues with the computer. Apologies for that. Okay. So first, as I said, this is a webinar organized by GECO, which stands for Gender Equality for Climate Change Opportunities, a 5-year program supported by IUCN and implemented by a 5-year program supported by USAID and implemented by IUCN. GECO has different pillars, one of which is its energy work that has been designed to support the energy sector and particularly make linkages with the mitigation sector and to try and address the gender dimensions of this work. As I also said before, we are organizing this webinar in collaboration with a marvelous partner, Energia, which is celebrating its 20th anniversary this year, I just realized. And their vision for a very long time has been for women and men to have equal and equitable access to and control over sustainable energy services. Energia is now hosted by HEVO's Foundation in the Netherlands and is currently working on 3 different programs. One on women's economic empowerment, another on gender and energy advocacy, and the third one, which is on gender and energy research program. And particularly today, you will be hearing from 2 of the main researchers from the gender and energy research program from Energia. When we were thinking about today's webinar, we came up with a series of questions we would like to address through the presentations of today. One is, what is political economy, really, and why is it important for mainstreaming gender into the energy sector? And I had refrained to try and define political economy, because I know Andrew will be in a very much better position to do so. But at least when we're thinking about political economy, what comes to my mind is that it is a branch of social sciences that tries to understand the relationship between individuals and societies, and how these relationships affect markets and the state, whether this is by understanding incentives, relationships, or power distribution. And the reason that we think it's necessary for us to explore political economy as a tool is because gender relations are also a reflection of power relations in society, and this, one way or the other, are translated into into the energy policies, and have therefore an impact on development. So now that I've tried to address this question, but mainly trying to push Andrew to go deeper into the definition and clarify some of the confusion I may have created at the moment, I would like to follow up with the other questions, which are the options that policymakers and other actors in the energy sector have for addressing the integration of gender equality and their concerns into the energy policies, which could be or are characteristics of a gender-responsive energy policy. How can we know that a process or the content of one of these policies is being gender responsive? Why is it important to understand women's bargaining power within the household or in the policy making sphere? And also, one of the things that we are trying to do through today's presentation and interventions is to see how political economy can be a tool for understanding the macro, the meso, and the micro levels, so that we can understand how women's empowerment can have a positive impact in their access to modern energy services. The agenda for today's webinar starts with this introduction and welcome to all of you, and then it's followed by a presentation by Andrew Barnett on political economy and gender mainstreaming in the energy sector. Then we'll have Catherine Danielson talking to us about gender and a rights perspective approach to energy access. And finally, we would have Dev Nathan speaking on women's bargaining power and its implications for the energy sector. We will try to be brief, or the presenters are going to try to be brief, so that we can allow for sufficient time at the end to have questions from the audience and engage in a conversation. If you're interested on an initiative, I would like to encourage you to reach out to us, and you can find here our contact details. And for any kind of information you would want, or for checking in our webinars, I would like to direct you to our green platform at www.genderandenvironment.org/energy. Now, at this moment, then, it is my pleasure to introduce you to our first panelist, Mr. Andrew Barnett, who is the director of the Policy Practice, a consultant firm that specializes in political economy analysis. Andrew is an economist with more than 40 years of experience in development, with a specific expertise in energy policy. At one time or another, Andrew was a specialist advisor to both the UK House of Lords and the House of Commons Select Committees on Science and Technology, and for 10 years was a member and then a moderator of the Independent Technical Advisory Group, which advises the World Bank and the consultative group of bilateral donors on their trust-funded energy programs, which also include SMAP. Andrew is also the chair of the Technical Advisory Group of Energia's Gender and Energy Research Program, and a very fun speaker to listen to. So, Andrew, I'm very happy to give you the word, and I'm very looking forward to understanding better political economy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Well, here I am, this new technology. It's quite a challenge for old people like me. And indeed, the screen has not moved forward. Let me just see why not. Why? Oh, there we are. I just thought I should start with a health warning. The picture on the left is me when I started in this field, and the picture on the right is as I am today. As I said, that I run a consulting firm, the policy practice, and we specialize in political economy analysis.
Andrew, I'm sorry, but we don't seem to be seeing the slides moving.
Okay, have your slides moved? It has moved for me. So what would you like me to do? Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Could
Can you see
you?
the screen? Yes.
No, I can't. Could you please press escape and try putting on the screen again?
So, right, I'm there. Have I? Oh, right. Is that better? Can you see it now?
Yes, now I can.
I can see.
Does it say what is the problem?
Yes, it does.
Okay. Oh well, let me do my joke and come back just one. Right. Let me just do the slideshow. Let me see. Is that working? Right.
It is. Don't worry. It is.
Okay. Right. Okay, I don't quite understand. Okay, so if I move it forward, does that work? Is everybody there? That's my joke, which is this is how I looked when I started in this field, and this is what I look like now. Right. Does that work? Okay. I think that I wanted to start by really talking about that we, as an economist who has been writing many plans and schemes over the last 40 years, our experience is that they were rarely implemented. And the question is, why is that? Of course, it's important to stress that many of these schemes, not only the ones I wrote, but many schemes, don't get implemented because they're financially or technically unsound, or there's insufficient capability to implement them. But generally, many aid donors and many analysts are coming to the conclusion that the reason they're not implemented is politics. And the question is, what do we mean by that? From our point of view, this term political economy analysis recognizes the fact that some individuals or groups will fail to move forward an investment or scheme, or indeed will obstruct it because it's not in their interest to move it forward. Applied political economy analysis recognizes this, and it explores the often hidden incentives and interests of all the individuals and groupings whose collaboration is critical for success. In doing political economy analysis, we're trying to identify the interventions that are both economically and politically sustainable. Implementation of any scheme creates opportunities for many interests to play, both in rent seeking, looking for bribes and other things, or ways of blocking progress. Those with political power are not disinterested. So as this man McLaughlin said, political economy analysis aims to situate development interventions within an understanding of the prevailing political and economic processes in society, specifically the incentives and relationships, the distribution and contestation of power between different groups and individuals. I think it's important to realize, and one of the things we're doing with the Energia program is to recognize that the language of political economy analysis and the language of gender analysis have very strong overlaps. There's a recent review of this literature for DFID by Evie Brown, and she remarked that the language between the two are very similar. And of course, gender relations is a key aspect of power relations. Gender is often described as the unequal power relations between men and women. But despite the areas of overlap, gender issues are not yet, I would say, they do not feature prominently in political economy or political economy frameworks. And it's part of our job to see if we can integrate the two. Feminist scholars are concerned about how political economy impacts men and women differently, and whether men and women are differently able to access power. Power in this sense being political power rather than electricity. So when we do political economy analysis, and clearly I'm going to have to talk in a very superficial way because I only have 4.2 minutes left, we start by trying to understand what is the problem. What is the problem we're trying to address? And for us in this Energia network that I'm working with, we're trying to understand why women can't get enough access, or in my language, use of modern energy services. Why is this? And then we can look at who wants this change, and indeed who is against it. Now this will vary from context to context, and it will vary between location, remote areas, rural areas, generally urban areas, and between countries. If we look and can identify the players, we can then start to understand their sources of power. And again, it's not possible to go into this now in great detail, but you can understand that power comes in many forms, out of the barrel of a gun or through the mass action of trade unions or others. It may be just a matter of Twitter feeds and the ability of individuals to influence things like the US presidential election. We also try to understand who is not engaged in this process but could be, both for and against the change, and to see if we can't get them to form a coalition where they see that their interests together, they have a common interest together. A great deal of our work looks at the empirical evidence of how particular stakeholders might be affected by change. And one of the things we find is that people have a misconception about the fact that they may be hurt by a particular change when they might in fact benefit from it. So one of the things that we can do as independent analysts is try to understand the distribution of impacts between groups and interest groups, and to show them that even if their short-term interests might be damaged, their longer-term interests might be favored. And from this we can go on to see if we can find ways to change the impacts of a particular intervention, to try and get more people on board, and to see if we can build this consensus for change. It has to be admitted that many of these incentives and disincentives are deeply entrenched, and it is not the case that it's possible to change everything in the near future. Many societies are completely locked in terms of their power relations, but generally there are avenues of opportunity, and change, as we can all see, can occur. I wanted just to reflect for a few seconds, though, on these ideas that came from a paper I've just read, and haven't checked to see with Mr. Harman Chitonge is in the audience, but his paper was commissioned for the Energia network. And one of the things that I noticed looking at this about South Africa was that women are increasingly in positions of power, both in the Ministry of Energy and in the utilities of South Africa. The energy policies are in fact gendered, and this is partly due to the constitutional requirement. But if we look on the ground, electricity supply and use are not gendered when implemented. And the question is, for me, why is this? Increases in representation may not result in actual shifts in power. And I think this is one of the fundamental issues that we're going to have to look at. I think I've now run out of time, so I'm going to quickly finish. Right, let me just, sorry, hang on. I've got a timer going off in my ear. Right, stop. I think we're all asserting that electricity needs of poor women differ from those of poor men. But the question I'm trying to think about is how specifically these changes, these differences occur. And indeed, what would a gendered electricity service really look like? Are we able to measure the distance, as it were, between what we ideally would like with the present situation? And to some extent, the problems of access are the problems of access to end-use technology. Who chooses the appliances that use the electricity? And that, to some extent, is the power relations within the household. That is really all I can say in 10 minutes. It's very, very brief. You'll see in the slides that there are various sources. Our own website has a library of material on this area, and the specific paper on the political economy of power sector reform in Africa. There are some more notes, particularly the types of questions that we tend to ask, and these are in the paper as well. But I will stop at that moment and look forward to your questions and what my colleagues have to say. So I shall hand back the screen if that was, I hope that's intelligible. Okay.
Thank you, Andrew. I think you've made a wonderful job with this description, and I can see that you're already steering a conversation, and questions are coming in. One is whether or not Mr. Chitonga's paper is available, and I guess we can direct people to the handout that we have on your paper where he's
the specific thing on his paper is in draft form, and Dev Nathan, who's speaking later, may know the status of it, but I understand that it is being revised as we speak. Okay. Okay,
so we have a forthcoming paper, an exclusive, I would say, in this webinar. So if you're interested on Mr. Chitonga's paper, keep your eyes on Energy's web, because I'm sure there's where it will be published first. I would like to then take the opportunity to invite Katrin Danielson, our next panelist, to the floor. Katrin is the Senior Advisor at the Royal Tropical Institute, the KIT, in Amsterdam. She has more than 20 years of experience working as a researcher, a program manager, and a strategic advisor on gender equality and women's rights in sustainable development. Her interests lie in agriculture, natural resources management, energy, and mining. And in Katrin's most recent work, she has developed a gender and rights-based approach to energy access as an analytical framework and strategic tool, which has been condensed in a paper that you can find in our handout section. This approach recognizes access to energy as a right and acknowledges the institutional barriers women face in realizing energy rights due to unequal gender relations in the energy system governance. The floor is yours. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Yeah, first I'd like to say that it's a great pleasure to be participating in this important webinar. Thanks to the IUCN and Energia for giving me the opportunity. Yeah, so today I will talk about some key elements of this gender and rights-based approach to energy as an analytical framework and strategic tool to design gender-responsive energy policies and interventions. I'll give attention to how energy poverty is gendered and why women's access, control, and benefit are different than those of men, and I'd also like to touch upon why women's interests are not addressed in energy policies and the options energy policymakers, as well as other actors in the energy sector, have to support gender-responsive energy policy in order to realize women's energy rights. But first, I'd like to say I think it's really positive that political economy analysis is increasingly being applied to the energy sector in order to understand better how political factors shape the delivery of energy services to citizens. This work, I think it's important to improve the understanding of the rather complex interactions and power relations between energy sector actors. But generally speaking, as Andrew also just mentioned, gender concerns have so far not been included much in the political and economy analysis. So the energy system governance analysis, that's the core, or is at the core of a gender and rights-based approach to energy that I'm going to talk about today. It has a lot in common with political economy analysis because it also focuses on exploring decision-making about energy access from intra-household level to national levels and even global level. But energy system governance is which is I define as institutions and processes of decision-making about access to energy services, including those in formal positions as well as ordinary citizens. I'd say that kind of analysis, it goes further than most political economy analysis, as it uncovers the what we could call the gender inequitable distribution of resources and benefits from energy, and the unequal recognition of women in energy system governance relative to men. But let's get started with some of the key elements of the gender and rights-based approach. First, and most fundamentally, the gender and rights-based framework is considering access to energy as a right. It means that having access to energy is a legitimate claim, it's an entitlement. And the rationale for considering energy access as a right is based on the fact that energy access has profound implications for human development. And not at least that access to energy services, it is a prerequisite for realizing other rights, other economic and social rights, such as for food and health, for example. Access to energy is therefore not surprisingly increasingly positioned as a rights concern. Most recently in the formulation of the SDG 7, which aims to ensure access to affordable, reliable, sustainable and modern energy for all. It's really rights language. And there the rationale is a bit the same, that without energy other SDGs will not be achieved. I would like to say, though, having brought attention to the SDGs, that unfortunately SDG 7 does not include gender-specific targets, but that's a different story. And then to the following element of the framework, individual energy users, men and women, are considered rights holders with claims, and the state, on the other hand, is considered the primary duty bearer and has the obligation to promote its citizens' rights to access energy services. And this obligation extends also to other energy sector governance actors whose decisions and actions affect how rights holders can realize the energy rights. So it's absolutely not only the state, it can be all sorts of different organizations and institutions at all levels, even in the household and family. Another fundamental element is analyzing how gender and other social relations influence people's access to energy services. In other words, looking for answers to questions such as, how is energy poverty gendered? Why do women access, control and benefit differently from energy services than men? How do gender norms and values affect women's access to energy? And what voice do women have in determining their energy priorities? And what we know from such analysis is that women in most developing countries experience energy poverty more severely than men, because without access to such services, women and girls can risk spending most of their day performing subsistence tasks, including time-consuming and physically draining tasks, for example, when they have to collect firewood. We also know the severe consequences of this. A few examples, that women and girls' options to earn additional income is limited, their opportunities to improve their labor productivity is restricted, the options for social and political interactions outside the household could be restrained, and so forth. So moreover, these conditions, they create further barriers to women's ability to voice their energy concerns and claim their rights, reinforcing women's exclusion in energy governance. In other words, unequal gender relations shape rights of access to energy services and consequently also the different benefits women can derive from them. What we also know from gender and rights analysis is that these gender issues are often not addressed in energy policy and programs, and in rights terms that women's energy rights fail. And that's a result of the underlying social rules, norms, and practices that shape the roles and relations between men and women that are also permeating energy system structures and institutions. And that also includes what can we call legal and regulatory frameworks, policies, programs, all of it. These rights failures need to be redressed at the level of energy system governance and address such issues at the individual level in order for us to really contest these structural gender inequalities at all levels. Rights failures in energy system governance concerns two interrelated areas. First, women's rights to energy fail because there's often a lack of recognition of the value of women's work. For example, it's very often that there's no value attached to the work women are doing when they collect firewood, for example. Also, there's often a real lack of recognition of the value of women's roles, which that's sometimes evident in the lack of investment in improved cooking technologies at different levels, both household, national levels. And another example is the lack of recognition of women's multiple roles. Women are often not even recognized as farmers, and there's also not always a lot of trust in women as entrepreneurs. Second, women also face difficulties in benefiting from energy service because of inequitable access to resources. For example, women often lack control over land and property, which then limits their ability to benefit equally to men from energy facilities. Examples are solar system, wind turbines, and even biofuel plantations that require land. If women don't have land, there's an access issue. And women often lack income, which is then a barrier for investing in technology that improves the productivity of their labor. And another issue that is commonly known is that women often there's a real barrier for women to access credit, which then limits their ability to pay the upfront costs of improved energy technology or connection fees to the electricity grid, as just as some example. But energy system institutions and actors, they can reinforce, they can challenge the way in which women and men are valued and recognized in society and how resources are distributed, obviously. And from a gender and rights perspective, these actors do have obligations to do so and can be held accountable for their efforts and results by rights holders. Overall, the role of the state as the primary duty bearer is, in the language of the SDGs, to ensure that no one is left out from accessing energy services. And governments set themselves targets in many ways, whether through energy sector plans or national energy development plans, publicly stated policy objectives, so forth, even international agreements. And assessing these energy-related targets from a gender and rights perspective allows us to understand the contemporary ambition of any national government and whether new gender-responsive targets are created and committed to where needed and how these targets are framed. Those are some of the key issues that we have to look at. But let me now mention a few options energy policymakers and other actors in the energy sector they can use to support responsive energy policy. So we have targeted budget allocations. First and foremost, where does the government invest? The percentage of the budget allocated to the improvement of household energy technologies or to decentralized renewable energy solutions is by some advocated to be an indicator of gender responsive energy policy. And decisions in budget allocations actually relate to all the other three options that I've listed here, such as investing and subsidizing gender responsive infrastructure. Of course, interventions depend on context, but we have evidence that show that women in rural areas often benefit from decentralized energy solutions, such as, for example, in Nepal, where mini-grids is a real good way for women to access electricity. Another example is investment in better distribution of alternative fuels that relieve women of their existing burden. And we could also mention investing and subsidizing powered equipment in areas that benefit women, such as in agriculture. And this is actually a good example that energy policy or gender responsive energy policy, it's not only made in energy line ministry, but in this case it could be in the Ministry of Agriculture. Then we have legal and regulatory reform. And one example is promoting off-grid technologies such as wind turbines, water mills, solar equipment, and processing of biomass to create liquid fuels through the introduction of targeted subsidies, economic incentives, and new credit facilities that women can access, which would really make a difference. And let's move then to gender responsive human resources management, because energy sector legislators and policymakers, they can introduce changes to legislation and to regulation that can provide the basis for shifts in social expectations about roles and responsibilities of men and women and the rights that they should enjoy. Examples include introduction of targets or quotas to improve gender balance in energy organization, but at all levels. More women in formal energy institutions can act as role models and influence attitudes towards women at household and community level. The final element of the framework, of the approach, is to look at different channels for making energy rights claims and ways to strengthen the voice of rights holders to ensure accountability to gender equality and women's rights in energy systems, based on what I mentioned before, that the governments, they have often set themselves targets, or also based on advocacy for setting new gender responsive targets. Actually, both at global level, national level, local level, civil society is a growing force to change in the energy system. At all levels, we see civil society organizations advocating for gender responsive policy and develop initiatives that raise the awareness about energy rights and awareness about these rights, both amongst citizens, rights holders, but definitely also strengthening both the capacity, but the awareness and then the capacity of duty bearers to respond to those. And indeed, there are and we see lots of opportunities here for creating coalition across and between actors, also between public and private and civil society actors. We don't have much time to look into this side of the story, so if you are interested, as Anna mentioned, there is a link to the paper that describes in more detail this approach, and there you can see a lot of different examples, and also see a table that really tries to translate the different rights failures into rights claims, and also show what channels can be used to claim those rights. I think the last thing I want to say in terms of characteristics of gender responsive energy policy, probably the most important one is the extent to which women have had a voice in the process of developing those. But that's also more related to this final part of the framework that we don't have time to discuss today. So that's all what I had to say during this webinar. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Katrine. It's been a very interesting presentation to listen to, and I'm very happy to see that people have taken advantage of sending in their questions, and we're very happy we're collecting them. Because we're only going to post the questions to the presenters at the end, we would like to ask you to please be clear in the way that you share your questions, so that we can do our best in presenting them to the presenters, and try to avoid a misunderstanding, and with the objective, of course, of being able to provide you with the answers you're looking for. So when you shoot your questions to us, give us a little bit of additional context if possible, so that we can share that with the presenters. It's my honor to introduce to you our last presenter of today's webinar, Deb Nathan, who is a professor at the Institute for Human Development in Delhi and a visiting research fellow at Duke University in the US. His main research interests are global production networks, labor conditions, rural and indigenous people development, and gender issues. Most recently, Deb has been introducing research on manufacturing and innovation, particularly reverse innovation in emerging economies. He's a co-editor of a recently released Labor in Global Value Chains in Asia and of the new Cambridge University Press series, Development Trajectories in Global Value Chains. Some of his recent publications are Adhar, Gender Identity and Development from 2014, Markets and Development of Indigenous Peoples in Asia from 2012, and Labor in Global Production Networks in India from 2010. Deb is also a senior researcher for Energia's research program on political economy. Deb, the floor is yours.
Okay, do you have my screen?
Yes, we do. If you could put it into presentation mode.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
No problem.
Okay. Yeah, is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine, but we see the whole of your screen. Yeah, that is perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Anna, and it's good to be here making this presentation. I'd like to take up the question that Andrew posed. Why is there a difference between policy and impact? And I'd like to look at it at the micro level, the household bargaining power, and how it has an impact on energy use. As was mentioned, this is part of the Energia research project that we are doing with the Swaminathan Research Foundation here in India, working with Energia. So how do we pose the problem? We look at it in this way. First of all, the number of rural households in developing countries using wood fuel is very high. In the LDC, it is 86%. In Sub-Saharan Africa, it's 87%. In Bangladesh, it's 89.6%. Nepal, 83%, and India, 76%. Now, not only is it high, but it's also persistent. In India, we have data over time period, and it shows that in 93, 94, it was 78% of the rural population using wood fuel. And in a period of 17, 18 years, it only came down by 2 percentage points to 76%. So though this was a period of very high growth in India, it showed hardly any change in the manner in which the rural households use wood fuel. So that is the key question we want to look at, utilizing the methods of political economy, gendered political economy analysis. What is our fundamental of our analysis is that we start with the point that there is a difference between access and use. Most policy and documents really end with access, and they are happy when they show that there is an increase in access. They don't actually go down to see what's the use, how this energy is being used at the household level, because it's over there that the bargaining power and the question of the manner in which households arrive at decisions comes into the question, the gendered bargaining power. Now, the usual economic analysis used in energy analysis, most of all, is that this depends upon income and price. So as income goes up, one would expect that the use of wood fuel as energy would go down, and the use of cleaner fuels like, say, LPG would go up. So this is the general analysis, but as we saw in the data earlier, it doesn't seem to be actually happening in that manner. If we look at it a little more in detail, this is a graph we prepared from the Indian National Sample Survey, which is a very large household survey conducted over a couple of 100,000 households all across the country. The red line over there is the urban graph, and the blue is the rural. Now, this shows the percentage of fuel consumed in the household percentage of wood as a proportion of total fuel consumption in the household. You will see the red line that as income goes up, it very quickly goes down and almost becomes zero as you come to the top deciles. On the horizontal axis, we have the income deciles or consumption deciles, and on the vertical axis, we have the percentage of wood as a proportion of household fuel. But look at the blue line, the rural line, and you'll see it hardly changes right until the 8th decile. It doesn't change at all. It is what we will call inelastic with respect to income or consumption level of the household. It's only after the 8th decile onward that it quickly decreases. So it's very inelastic. It doesn't change with household income. This is the finding of the Indian Rural Household Survey. This is of the latest one, which was the round of 2010, 2011. So it shows a very inelastic change in the use of wood as income increases. So what is our explanation for this? We take over here, here's where power comes in, we take the value of women's labor time as a key factor explaining the persistence of wood as fuel in rural developing India. This women's labor time we divide into two parts, labor in production and labor in cooking, which we take as a proxy for all domestic work. So labor in production and in domestic work. So the key equation which we have over here is that the labor time in production multiplied by the value of production gives the value of women's labor. Now, of course, we are setting the value of domestic labor as equal to 0, but then that's what economic analysis tells us, that it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist in the standard national accounts. And what is invisible is something that policy does not address. So what we see is that fuel use, whether a household uses wood or LPG, can be seen as a change from labor using or labor saving technology. Labor using technology is wood and labor saving technology is the LPG. So our analysis, our hypothesis, if we put it that way, is that as the value of women's labor increases, there is an increase in the pressure to economize on the time spent in cooking and adopt labor saving methods. So it is this key relationship that pushes a household to move in the direction of labor-saving methods in cooking, which means also the adoption of LPG rather than wood. So therefore, our equation is that household fuel use, taking two alternatives, wood or LPG, is a function of the value of women's labor in production. It is not a function of household income alone, which is what the standard analysis tells us. So this is how we bring the women's, the gendered relations into it. Of course, behind the value of women's labor in production and how it translates into a change in bargaining power is a question that we have to analyze and see what is happening. Why is there a change in women's bargaining power in the household when the value of her labor in production increases? Now, in looking at the link between these two variables, that is, we have the independent variable as the value of women's labor in production and the dependent variable as the labor saving in energy use. We have taken this at 3 levels each, low, medium, and high, L, M, and H. So we can have a low value of women's labor. We can have the top left-hand cell, which is LL, where you have a low value of women's labor in production and a low labor saving in energy use. So that is a high level of wood use. We go down the diagonal and we come to HH, which is high value of women's labor in production and a high labor saving in energy use, which would mean that the woman is very substantially involved in income generating activities and utilizes labor saving fuel like LPG. So the LL, MM, and HH, these three, the diagonal, is where we would expect the empirical observations as we do our field work, we would expect them actually to fall along that diagonal. MM, I wouldn't go more into that, but that's the medium level. Now take the bottom left hand where we have L and H. We have a low value of women's labor in production, and we have a high labor saving and energy use. That is, like, say, the distribution of LPG. In our understanding, this is a unstable and unlikely to hold situation, because that, as we have seen in many projects which have distributed LPG free or through a subsidized capital, through some form of capital subsidies, it doesn't really work very well. It is not sustainable. Very often the women give it up as soon as they get it. If they do keep it, they don't replace the cylinder. And so we find that when women's labor, value of women's labor in production is very low, these capital subsidies don't really work. Now, so coming back to the basic analysis, what is it? That our hypothesis is that energy use decisions are related to the value of women's labor. Plus, we also add to it norms or doxa or default or habitual decisions. I mean, you may move to having a higher value of labor in production, but you may still think that, oh, this is our culture, this is how we cook. We don't cook rice with gas fuel, we cook it with wood because that's the way we like it. So this also comes in, but the important factor we want to emphasize and on which the changes take place is that of the value of women's labor in production. Now, there is a balance along the diagonal. So you have L and L together, M and M together, H and H together. But this balance is not something that comes about automatically. How does this work? This works through household negotiation. So labor saving in fuel does not automatically follow the value of women's labor in production, but is brought about by bargaining or by agency of women in household decisions. So there is a bargaining relationship which is affected by women's labor or the value of women's labor in production. It doesn't automatically translate into a change in fuel use. It also has to be first mediated by a change in women's power or a change in women's bargaining relationship within the household. In the bargaining relationship within the household, in coming to household decisions, we use the Amartya Sen model of cooperative conflict, where the bargaining power in a negotiation depends on the independent income that each of the two partners may have. That is, there is a cooperation between the two partners in, say, producing a household income, but there is also a conflict between the two partners in how that household income will be distributed or spent. Will it be spent on, say, buying a TV for entertainment, or will it be spent on buying a LPG system to save women's labor time and to protect their health? This depends upon, this is where the conflict comes in, and the position of each partner in that bargaining depends on their independent income. That is how much they can earn outside of a cooperative relationship. The higher you can earn on your own, the stronger your position within the bargain. The less you earn on your own, the weaker you will be. A woman who's not working outside and who's not earning an income will be in a very weak position because she really has nothing on which to bargain. But a woman who is working outside will be stronger because, and one can even go further and say, if the woman were to earn more than the man, it's more likely that she will be much more, even more stronger in the bargaining position within the household. So the first factor is the independent income or which affects the bargaining position, power. Secondly, also the perception of income contribution. Now, you may earn a lot of income, but if you think that this is just pocket money that I'm earning while my husband is the main earner, then you'll also think that, you know, what I'm doing is not really something very important, not very great. It's no big contribution to the household. Then you will yourself downgrade your own bargaining position within that. The third factor which we have put in here is the control over land and assets, which can work along with and even independent of income. You may not be you may earn not so much of an income, but you may also control land and assets of the house, though you don't yourself deploy that in production. So one can add some more factors to this, but these are the basic or the more important ones that we have identified. So I would like to just conclude from this that we have summarized the link between a high or low value of women's labor in production. That is the structure, as we may put it in political economy terms, and this would usually give us a situation of a high or low labor saving in the fuel that is used in cooking or in domestic work. Within this structure, however, women's agency translates a change in structure into a change in the bargaining position. So that women where the structure changes with women now earning more income, there is a change in the bargaining position. Women can also change these structures by, say, advancing into income generating activities, like as we see often in India, through the intermediation of what are known as self-help groups or microcredit organizations, where women are able to move into income-generating activities on their own or with a group. And finally, that fuel switching is more likely to be successful where women are time constrained due to the high value of labor in production. So we do think that time constraint is important, and the value of labor in production, a low value will not lead, even with a time constraint, is unlikely to lead to a change in the manner in which fuel is used within the household. So from this, we do also go to a, sorry, I lost the full screen. So I'll just put it up. Okay, now it's there. So our policy conclusion from this analysis is that along with access, it is necessary to promote women's involvement in income-generating activities in order to increase women's bargaining power and therefore in household decision-making on energy. So I just end by saying that as Andrew posed the question of women's bargaining power is critical in changing or moving from access to use at the household level. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deb, for your presentation. And I want to invite our participants to keep on sending in their questions, because right now is the opportunity that we have for a small conversation. I think we have a good 20 to 25 minutes, which sounds like not that much time, but I'm going to try my best to present as many questions to the presenters as possible. And I would like to start, Andrew, with you, if we could. I have a question here for you that says, I don't think that the positive impact might be considered relevant if someone else also benefits. In other words, is relative power not the best? Let me just reread that. Is relative power not the best predictor for change or not? So I'm going to read the question again for you, Andrew. Yeah, okay, so it says, don't you think that positive impact might be considered not relevant if someone else also benefits? In other words, is relative power not the best predictor for change or not?
Right, I'm not entirely sure what the person is getting on here. I mean, clearly, relative power is at the heart of it. If they're making the point that the impact of a project is neither here nor there, that is also a fair point. I don't know if my other co-panelists can understand the question better, but I'm not sure I'm fully understanding the nature of the question.
Okay, so maybe we're going to ask, I hope that this person is still with us, and if he or she could send us a clarification of the question, we'll do our best to repost.
Sorry about that, yeah.
Yeah, that's okay. I do have another question for you. It says, Andrew raises a good question, which Energia has done some work on a few years ago, but this was very limited, about what does a gender-aware energy policy look like? Meeting gender-based needs is obvious. This is demand side. What about supply side? Do women and men have different preferences? Is there any evidence on this?
Right. I mean, that is, of course, precisely the issue. I came across this paper by Joy Clancy, who did address these issues in 2007 in a 6-7, which is an excellent paper. I think you can imagine, I mean, it is alleged at the level of rumor that, you know, if there's a single light bulb in a house, the men will want it outside the front door where they sit and drink their beer. The woman would like it in the cooking area. You might argue that being able to find one's way to the latrine at night is something that women worry about much more than men do. I focus myself on end-use technology. There are clearly things that I can imagine women want associated with milling and grinding and the reduction of extremely tedious things, or indeed, as Katrina said, to do with production, income generating production. So there are things that women traditionally do. There are niches that women could do in new areas of development, mobile phones and things like this. So the answer is, it looks as if end uses are gendered, and the actual impact will depend on the negotiation at the household and probably other levels as to what end-use technologies are actually adopted and used by the household or the community. And I think that is where the gendered nature of the problem comes. I myself have been trying to think through this, and I am still split as to whether mapping such differences is a trivial exercise or is absolutely fundamental. But naively, I feel if we could map out more clearly what a gendered end-use technologies would actually look like, we could then measure how far away we are from this ideal. And as I say, I was struck by the fact that representation of women in the power utility may well be a necessary condition, but it is not a sufficient condition. And I hope that answers the person's question. I can see lots of... Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think we're onto something, and perhaps this is also a question that Katrina or Deb would like to jump in.
Yes, please.
Yeah, also Katrina, because I know this. You've done also some thinking about how a gendered policy and gendered policy would look like, and I'm not sure if it's possible also to link that to a couple of questions I have that are addressed to you with regards to right bearers. And they're not the same, but they're a little bit similar, so I'm going to put them together. The first one is, how can women, the right holders, hold duty bearers accountable? And it was followed by another question that says that seems even more problematic when energy access duty bearers are distributed over sectors. So we have an issue with regards to rights bearers and how to, one, A, you can hold them accountable, and two, how that they can work when there are different sectors being involved.
Okay. I'd like to first jump back to the question that, or the discussion that that Andrew was engaging in about let's say gendered use of energy and different gendered benefits of energy. I think we have to look at it a little bit broader, actually. There's also the issue around access to energy as is related to how it impacts women's health. There we have to look at also whether health clinics in rural areas, which are crucial for women's health, health rights, if they are actually powered. We also have to look at issues. I think you might not have mentioned the first one, but the second one, I think you did mention that, Andrew, that access to energy that can improve women's productivity, because it extends the day, meaning that women have more hours in the evening, where which is maybe the only time that they have left after they have engaged in all the other responsibilities and requirements, can also be a bit of a big change for women. There was one more I wanted to say in that regard, that I've forgotten. But I think those. So it's also, it's not just about the energy that the individual woman is able to use, but it's also how different services that are important for women, or important for even women's empowerment, such as access to health and sexual and reproductive rights, that they are also accessing energy. So that's one thing I wanted to mention. How can women hold duty bearers accountable? I think here we have to look at the different dimensions of women's agency. One dimension is collective action, meaning that women in different ways organize in order to claim rights, for example, and it can also be it doesn't even have to only be women as such, but it can also be representatives from organizations that are supporting gender issues, that are organizing, so that it can happen at different level. From a rights-based perspective, you'd look at which human rights frameworks, which policies you would want to address. Look at what kind of accountability mechanisms are in place. Those are sometimes that can be formal processes, mechanisms by which you will make complaints, or by which you can engage in reformulation of policies. So these kind of things are possible. That's sort of the more formal ones. And related to that, how does it work when it's across sectors? I think that was the question. Or not, Anna?
Yes, that was my interpretation. How does it also work when it's across sectors?
Right. It depends a little bit what the issue is, and maybe a good example is the interface between agriculture and energy. That there can be organizations. Climate change is actually a good example, because climate change is an issue that there's attention to climate change in various different sectors, and you have civil society organizations organizing around different issues on climate change. So it's definitely possible, depending on actually what kind of both organizational forms there are, and also what kind of frameworks there are that you can, through which you, or channels I should say, through which you can claim rights.
Okay, thank you. I would like to go now to Deb, and I have a couple of questions for you. Maybe you can help me untangle one of them. And if you want to join or make comments to any of the questions we've posted before, also please feel free to. One of the questions is a little bit cryptic to me. It says, I assume the mechanism Deb proposes can be blocked by barriers Katrine talks about. So Deb, if you understand what that is, I'll invite you to comment on it. And I have another one that says, a study by Dominique Lallemant in India found a significant increase in the use of LPG due to electrification, but not in women's participation in the labor market. Studies from Nicaragua and South Africa show an increase in employment due to electricity, and also decline in the use of fuel wood. How would you go about examining these links further, and how would you explain the Indian case, more LPG, but not increase in women's employment?
Well, okay. Taking the second one first, there have been, as I said, large-scale programs for subsidized distribution of LPG to poor women, but the studies have shown that one, they did not hold on to them for very long. Secondly, if they did hold on to it, they used it as a secondary fuel for say, preparing tea and snacks when people like us go there as guests, but their primary fuel has remained wood. So there really is not a change. It leads to what the energy analysis calls fuel stacking, where wood remains the primary fuel. I think the important change we want to see is not whether there's LPG in the house, but is it the primary fuel? And I think if you look a little more into these studies, you will see that it is not the primary fuel. Secondly, I don't think that you would have this situation where just the increase in electricity led to it without any changes in employment. Because there may be changes, but as I said, they're very unstable and just lead to fuel stacking. Now, a couple of other questions which came up earlier on. The relative power question. Of course, relative power is related to end use. And here I'm taking the question of the type of fuel that is used as the main area of end use. But this also extends to other things that Andrew referred to. Where do you put the light bulbs in the house? The last place would be the kitchen, because that is the least favored location of, say, the men or of the household public goods. It will be placed there for children's education or for entertainment, and last of all, for a place like the kitchen. And last, on the question of how do you hold the duty bearers accountable, there is an important role for collective action. Through mobilization of different kinds, there's a role for their participation in elections with these kind of platforms for the provision of services. So there is an important role for such actions to make the duty bearers accountable. Yeah, I think I would end with that.
Thank you very much. And I want to say that we've received a clarification to the first question to Andrew on relative power, and it reads like this: actors might block progress if they feel others will gain power, even if they would benefit from the progress. For example, foresters do not want farmers in forests, even if women users might manage it sustainably. Andrew, do you want to react to that?
Yes. I mean, there's a whole series of issues about whether there is a zero-sum game, if that's the point the person is making. I mean, clearly there are cases where a particular action can result in everybody being a winner, but some are more winners than others. And so if that's the point, I mean, I would certainly accept that. And I think that the perception of the benefits or the blocking of an action is really what needs to be unpacked. I think that's the only thing I can say at this stage. I think one has to really try and understand what motivates the people, and if it's a matter of relative power, that needs to be examined. But I think the other thing where the conflict really arises is the time horizon of the benefits. Certainly politicians who are currently in power tend to take decisions that are extremely short-term in nature. And certainly in our country, we have decisions about infrastructure that have not been taken, like the third London airport, for over 40 years, because it's not, the benefit of the airport will not come during their time. And again, I don't know if this is what the questioner is asking. It's slightly difficult for me to cope with the question in this particular way, but I don't know if I've answered it anyway, but I'm trying. Anybody else have a thought about this?
No, I would just add.
Please go ahead, Deb.
Okay, I would just add this, that the question of, as Andrew said, is it a zero-sum game? Now, there is a cooperation and there is also conflict, how the benefits are going to be distributed. So we should see not just one side, but also the other. There's both of these types of actions and both of these types of relations which exist in any bargaining or in any household decision making.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. I want to move to Katrine, perhaps. I have a question that says, well, thanks for the interesting presentation. One question for Katrine is regarding the monitoring of electricity. From a gender perspective, taking rights into account, do you think a monitoring system a la the Women's Empowerment in Agricultural Index would be purposeful? Decision-making is often ignored, and it seems that sustainable energy for all would only have minimal attention to intra-household aspects. Do you have any comments on this?
I think it's an interesting idea. The Women's Empowerment in Agriculture Index tries to engage with empowerment from different perspectives. Access to and control over resources being one of them, decision-making being another, and as far as I remember, also norms and values. And I think to me, it also relates to the question about that Dev got about whether not some of these social norms and values that I was mentioning, whether they would not actually be an important dimension in the framework of the research that Dev is involved in. I think sometimes that independent decision-making by women, it's really confronted with social disapproval, and it comes at the cost of losing social capital, which can be both within the household, in terms of conflicts, but violence, for example, even loss of the support of different family members, but definitely also at the community level. I think that dimension, together with access to and control of resources and the decision-making factor, is important to take into account. And in terms of then trying to measure that is obviously difficult. But the measurement that is piloted in agriculture tries to give different values to each of the sub-factors of women's empowerment, and then come up with, you could say, almost a grade of women's empowerment. That I would not think would be very useful in energy, because you would have to put in a number of very different variables. So if you got some sort of a grade that said something about access to electricity, but the quality of the access was really poor, while there was maybe a relatively low financial investment needed, that and you've got some sort of an average of that, I don't think that would be very useful at all.
Thanks, Katrine. Dev, would you like to also comment on the question posed to Katrine and what she just said?
Can you just repeat what the question was in this kind of situation?
Yeah, well, it was mainly about a monitoring system that's used in Women's Empowerment in Agricultural Index. But I was wondering if you wanted to react a little bit on some of the comments that actually Katrine made in terms of increasing the variables for analyses.
Yeah, sure. We would increase the variables. We have started with a basic one, which is the value of women's labor power in production, the value of their labor. As I also introduced the question of default options, meaning really the norms and standards that exist in any society and which become a factor in influencing decisions and which are not easily overcome. So we have included that. We are introducing others, including in terms of the fact that independent decision-making is frowned upon. But all of these factors are there, but we would place emphasis or strong emphasis on the first one, and that is the value of women's labor in production, while bringing all the others.
Okay, thank you. I have a comment for you, Andrew, and
yep.
Perhaps the person who's been emailing on this particular topic knows you. His name is Frank van Schaubroek.
Yep.
And he says, thanks for discussing my question on perceived benefits. Andrew, I would share a paper that looks at the forestry sector in Nepal that found this mechanism and stalled all progress for decades. Doesn't sound good. Okay, so there's a paper coming your way.
That's very good. That's very good. Happy to see these things.
Great. And perhaps to move towards a little bit more of a positive note, I wanted to ask you, during your presentation, you were commenting about the possibility of creating alliances for once you understand that the interest within the sectors and moving through alliances. And I was wondering if you wanted to add to some of the comments that Katrine has made in terms of mobilizing civil society, in terms of increasing awareness. Are there other things that come to your mind that you say, well, this would be very useful in terms of moving forward a gender equality agenda in the energy sector? Or this is something that we've learned in terms of forming alliances and what works through your work?
Well, I think there are a number of things that one can say. I mean, I think one of the things that Dev and his team are looking at is the extent to which women themselves can form alliances, whether women's groups, the political power that women's credit groups and groups of that sort can, in a sense, demand access to electricity, and to ensure through political mobilization that the lines come to them. Of course, it's not only a matter of the lines, it's also a matter of the end uses. That, I think, is the first. I think the other type of alliance that Katrine mentioned, I mean, clearly health centers and things like that really make a difference to children and women's health. And the more likely they are to be powered by electricity, the more useful they're going to be, ranging from light through to all sorts of refrigeration and sterilization and things of this sort. So there's an alliance there between, you could even say it is between women's agriculture and the people who promote women's agriculture, women's empowerment through agriculture, related to women's empowerment through health, and women's groups themselves. It seems to me these are the sorts of alliances that have a positive, I mean, that's the hypothesis. I think the idea that the supply will come to women in a sort of passive sense, that the top-down approach, that somebody in the headquarters will decide that this is a good thing. Of course, the utilities can only, well, most utilities only supply the power lines and the power in the line. They don't normally have much to do with end-use technology, and that, in my view, is where the women's empowerment becomes absolutely critical. So those are my thoughts on that. I think alliances can be formed. I think women have to organize, and again, it may be the relative power that I seem to be having so much difficulty with, that I don't think that it is necessarily the case that empowering women to get access to useful energy disempowers men in their access to energy. I think this is not a zero-sum game. Households improve if women's positions are improved in their access to energy, modern energy services. So I don't know, again, if that answers that particular question, but that's, I think, probably enough from me on that topic.
I think it does, and it definitely brings a lot of attention to one of the points that Deb was making in his presentation about how important perception may be, because although increasing women's access to these end technologies may not decrease men's access, perhaps the perception is different. I'm mindful of the time that we have, and at this point I would like to ask each of our panelists to give us one or two sentence message of a takeaway. So what it is the one message that you would like to share with the audience, so that when they go home they know what was the core of your presentation. Andrew?
Well, I think that political economy is a central analytical tool to making progress in this field. And my second statement is email me, because I'm really happy to engage with anybody on this topic if I can help in any way.
Brilliant, thank you. Katrine? Katrine, are you online?
She's muted, is she?
She might.
I'm happily talking, but not nobody hears it.
Now we hear you.
Okay, now you hear me. No, my last point is really that we have to remember that gender dynamics are not static. They are really dynamic, and they are unstable and they can change. And I think we have to remember that in our analysis. I actually thought after I had been talking that I had pointed to so many problems, and yes, they are definitely there, but there is also instability in gender dynamics, and a lot of positive action is taken by women themselves, by organized women, and by organizations, and we should obviously also give some attention to that part.
Yep.
Deb, if you could give us, share with us your takeaway message, please.
Okay. I think it's important to make a distinction between access and use. This is insufficiently done in the analysis. We just end with access. Of course, use is then just pushed away to being the kind of end uses, but the use is important. And it is in this difference that gendered bargaining power enters into the discussion in influencing household use of different types of energy. So these two, therefore, we need to really make this distinction and carry it through in our analysis and into the policy framework that we utilize.
Right. Well, thank you very much for me, and I'm sure because of the questions that we've been receiving, it's been a very interesting conversation to me and for the participants. We have a number of questions that we were not able to address. And we will pass it to the panelists so that they could write back to you and continue the conversation. Or if you prefer, you can also go ahead and email them directly, as they will share their contact information with you. I want to thank you, the panelists, for being here and for sharing with us their experience and knowledge, and for you, listeners and participants, for being there. It's been a really lively conversation thanks to you. We'd also like to invite you to our next webinar, which is going to be after the holidays. So end of January, most likely the 27th of January, we will be restarting our GECKO series of webinars with fresh new topics and panelists. And also, I've received a note that if you're interested in listening to a more in-depth presentation by Katrine, there is going to be a live stream presentation from her. And we will, as soon as we get more details on that, we will share with you. Most likely it is related to an energy and gender symposium organized at Twente University on the 23rd and 24th of next week. And I want to thank USAID again for their support and to their help of organizing these webinars, and of course to Energia, who's an amazing partner, and we're very happy that we've been able to team up once again with them to bring this webinar to you. That said, I would like to thank you all and remind you that the video and the presentations of this webinar are going to be uploaded quite soon, and we will share the link with you in case you want to go back and listen in or take a deeper look at the presentations. For us, it's been a pleasure and an honor to have you here, and we wish you a good night and good day further. Goodbye. Thank you.
Goodbye. Goodbye. Thank you all very much.
Bye.